live. Thank you all for coming. I'm delighted to have such an interesting group of participants in today's session. My name is Sian Basker. I'm co-chief executive at Data Orchard. This is my colleague Libby Harkins. Give us a wave, Libby. Libby and I are going to do the presentation today. For those of you who don't know Data Orchard, we are a social enterprise that specialises in helping organisations to get better with data. And a decade ago now, my colleagues and I were sort of first wondering how you might measure and compare how well organisations are doing with data. So today's quite a momentous occasion. It's been like 10 years of research, 5 years of actual data collection around measuring and benchmarking data maturity. So I feel like we can be increasingly confident now about the evidence and the answers to some quite key questions. The first one, I suppose, is always been in the forefront of our mind, which is what does great look like when it comes to organisations and their use of data. Some of the classic ones are, is the commercial sector really ahead in its data maturity? Are charities lagging, or maybe are they leading? Some of the question that always comes up, are bigger organisations better at data than smaller organisations? Are there differences in places and subsectors around how organisations are doing? And are the years of investment in public sector data capabilities putting them ahead on data maturity? So those are the questions that we will be diving into today. I'd like to invite you to tap into your curiosity and ask lots and lots of questions. I would be delighted if you could put them in the Q&A and please upvote questions that you would like us to answer. And we look forward to having a Q&A after our presentation. So, the first question, what is so great about data maturity? Why is it important? Why do we promote it? And I suppose there are 10 key reasons why, because what we see in organisations that have reached the most advanced mastering stage in data maturity is that it brings huge rewards to organisations and to those they serve. So looking at these through two different lenses. Firstly, looking at kind of quite core capabilities, these are the sort of internal capabilities. We see really great rewards and benefits. Data is helping organisations to be smarter, to be richer, and to be more impactful. And we hear a lot about the word efficiency. It's everywhere, especially in relation to AI these days. Definitely in there in the mix, not the strongest of the benefits, but nonetheless one of the benefits that we definitely see in those most advanced organisations. And if we take another lens and we look more outward in terms of how organisations are engaging with their clients or customers or their service users, again, we see some fantastic rewards. Data is helping organisations to reach people and places that need it most with better services and products that create a meaningful difference in people's lives and the environments we live in. So I'm going to delve into this a little bit more closely later on in today's presentation. The unfortunate thing about all of that joyous fruits of all of the effort around data is that only 5% of organisations that we've seen are at that mastering stage with data. So actually the data on the slide before was only about 50 out of the over 1,000 organisations that we've looked at that are really, really reaping those kinds of benefits and rewards. I'm going to just set a little bit of context for those of you who might be new to our work. As I said, it's been a decade since we began our pioneering research on organisational data maturity. And it was 2019 when we launched our first free tool for individuals to complete. Since then, we've developed the organisation and the cohort version of the tool. We've updated our underlying model of what good and great looks like. That's an eternally evolving piece of work, working on the next one now, that framework that sits under the assessment. And we've been doing these kinds of state of the sector reports for 5 years. So it feels like, it's a nice number, isn't it? 5, it's 2025. And so that's why we're all here today. A quick overview of the assessment tool. We've currently got almost 15,000 users of the tool from over 1,200 validated organisations. We've got loads of data. I mean, we just checked on it. It's like over 1.6 million data points. It's been used in the not-for-profit sector, in the public sector, in the commercial sector. It's had global reach into 56 countries. And we're really delighted that the feedback from users tells us that the tool is really helpful in engaging, in educating and motivating people in organisations to improve. So the data we're going to focus on today is the last full financial years. So we're taking it from April 2020 through to March 2025. And that's the data that we'll be using for today's presentation. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Libby now, who's going to take you through the next section.
Hello. Yes, so whenever we talk about data maturity, we like to set a couple definitions. So data maturity is an organization's journey towards improvement and increased capability in using data. And when we say data, we have a really broad and holistic definition of what this means. It's all the types of information your organization collects, stores, analyzes, and uses. So this can be recorded as numbers, words, videos, images, maps, and it can be held in digital files and folders, in spreadsheets and databases, all kinds of digital tools you use, but it can also be held physically on paper on your desks or in filing cabinets. So it's in almost everybody's job in every service and department all over an organization. And because it's so pervasive and complex, it can be overwhelming when you try and think about it at an organization level, which is why we think it's helpful to set out a simple framework to help structure how you think about data and data maturity. And so that's where Data Orchard's data maturity framework comes in, which I will talk you through now. So the data maturity framework has 7 key themes that are critical to success. A couple of them are quite practical. So what data you have and the tools you use to collect and analyze it. 2 of them are about purpose, so how you use the data internally and externally, and also analysis, so the ways you explore and make sense of it. And then really importantly, several of the themes are about people. So leadership, skills, and culture are all really fundamental to data maturity. And when we combine these 7 themes together, it enables an organization to advance along the 5-stage journey. So from unaware, emerging, learning, developing to mastering. And you'll see that when we show you data maturity scores from the tool, they lie on a scale of 0 to 5. And this correlates with that 5-stage journey. So with our data maturity assessment tool, it's an online questionnaire and it explores the 7 key themes in a little bit more detail. So the questions are designed around a set of sub-themes. So for example, in the leadership section, it'll include questions about attitudes, plans, capability, and investment. And the survey is over 100 questions long, which sounds crazy, but it does only take about 20 minutes for the average person to complete. And the goal is that it's an accessible, attractive, social, and quick way to assess an organization's data maturity. And because we have over 100 data points relating to data maturity, it can provide us with a really rich picture across those 7 themes about data maturity in that organization. So we don't have a specific theme for data governance and data security, which you may have noticed, but we do have around 20 questions that cover data security and governance. And these lie across 4 of the themes. So we have questions in culture, data, tools, and skills theme that we think are related to data security and governance. And sometimes when we're doing analysis, we might pull these questions out. But they cover policies, protection, controls, personal data access, data quality, availability, staff behavior, training, knowledge, and technology. So lots of different things related to data security and governance. So what's so special about our assessment and benchmarking tool? The first thing is that it's designed for a whole organization. So as we said before, data is everywhere in an organization, in every department and service and job role. So if you want to measure data maturity, you really do need to involve everyone. And people don't all agree, and this is what we see in every organization, is that there's a disparity of opinion, and that's normal. And what we like to do with the tool is we try and combine all these different opinions to get an overall score, which we often represent as a fish for an organization. And we think this is a truer reflection of data maturity than if just one person completed the assessment. And obviously in organizations where we have a higher percentage of people involved, sometimes we can get everyone. The results are more accurate than if just a couple people take part in the assessment. Secondly, we are fastidious, so we have really high standards and we pay a lot of attention to detail. We have a whole validation process for people who take the data maturity assessment, so we only include data from valid email addresses that are linked to an organization we can verify exists. We do quite a lot of data cleaning to try and clear out responses that we think the person maybe didn't take the assessment properly, or it was a test result, or if the same person took the assessment multiple times. And actually the amount of data we exclude is bigger than what we include, because we want to make sure that everything in our benchmark is really true and accurate. We check UK organisations against official registers, so the UK Charity Commission and Companies House, and we bring in data from those registers to help enrich our benchmarking data. There's also some quite sophisticated scoring and weighting behind the tool. It can get a little bit complicated, but each question has its own weighting and scoring that is taken into account when we create an overall organisation score. And finally, and really importantly, is that we're always improving. So as Sian said, the assessment is rooted in rigorous research and testing. We're now on version 23 of the data maturity tool, and we've just done our 6th round of product updates this summer. So we're hoping to always have it improving and be innovating, and we would always like your feedback as well. So if I've ever sent you a data maturity assessment user survey, then please do fill it out and let us know, because we do take into account what people say, how they find it useful, and how we can make the tool more enjoyable, more accurate, and more useful for people using it. So here's the big picture of the 5 years. We saw this chart before with the 3 sectors represented as different coloured fish. So I'm going to define the sectors that we use now. So the not-for-profit sector is charities, social enterprises, NGOs with a social mission, co-ops, trusts and universities. The public sector, local, regional, national government, education and health. And sometimes we'll combine the not-for-profit and public sector into the non-profit sector. So non-profits working for public good. And then we have the commercial sector, so public and private limited companies. And going throughout the presentation, you'll see that not-for-profit organisations are in this teal colour, public sector in orange, and commercial sector in that kind of dark red colour. And so when we split out the sectors into their separate shoals of fish, we see that there's no significant difference in data maturity between the sectors. So we often have these hypotheses that the commercial sector is going to be way ahead, and the not-for-profit sector, is that going to be more far ahead or lagging behind? And what we actually find is that each sector, there's a large range. There isn't a great deal of difference between the sectors, but most organisations do sit in that learning and early developing stage. But you have leaders and laggers in each sector. Okay, and then another question is whether data maturity is improving over time. So it looks like it is, but very, very slowly. Every year we kind of anticipate there's going to be way more organizations with a super high data maturity, usually because every year the chat around data and AI and seems to be more and more. But each year we see the same thing, is that progress is slow. And this makes sense because you can't change your data maturity within a matter of months. It takes years and it takes lots of time and investment. And in individual organizations, we do see data maturity scores. It's not a linear process of improvement. It'll improve dramatically, then it might plateau, and then it might increase again. So it makes sense it would take a while to see a change at a sector level. But it does seem that it is improving slightly, although this past year, 24 to 25, maybe less so. So we'll see how that goes in the future. And this chart is showing the change in data maturity average score separated by sector. So it's probably worth pointing out now that every year we tend to have the same proportion of organisations from each sector. So about 25% of our organisations come from the commercial sector, about 15% from the public sector, and then the rest, so 60%, come from the not-for-profit sector. And you see a similar trend for each sector, except the commercial sector in that first year, they seem to score particularly highly and then drop down, which we're not too sure about. But there were only 33 commercial organisations in that first year. So every year we are gaining more and more organisations, and it's becoming a more accurate picture. And then in this final year just gone, the three sectors are pretty close in their scores of data maturity. So the not-for-profit and the commercial sector both score an average of 2.8 out of 5. And then the public sector scores 3 out of 5. Okay, so now we're going to look at a little bit of geographical differences in data maturity. So most of our organisations come from the UK, but we do have over 350 non-UK organisations. And you'll see here that commercial organisations make up a bigger proportion of non-UK organisations than they do UK organisations. So when we look at a breakdown of the number of organisations from each country, we can see, yep, the biggest number of users are from the UK. And then it might be unsurprising to see the next largest countries are English-speaking nations, so Canada, USA, and Australia. And then we do also have quite a few countries where only one organisation was from that country. Okay, so this is looking at the average data maturity score of organisations from each country. And you can see that France is high up there with an average score of 3.3 out of 5. But we do only have 6 organisations. So it is worth bearing that in mind when you're looking at these results, that some countries we have a lot of data points and we can feel that it's a bit more of a robust measure, whereas there's some countries where we have a lot less data points. But at the moment, it's looking France, India, Ireland, UK, Belgium are scoring a bit higher, and then Brazil, Netherlands, Germany, Peru, and New Zealand are scoring slightly lower. And if we focus in on the UK specifically, we see that devolved nations appear to be doing slightly better. Northern Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, and we do tend to see this in the past years as well. But then in the east of England, East Midlands, Yorkshire and the Humber, North East, they're scoring a little bit lower on average in terms of data maturity. But we also have less organisations from these areas, so we've got slightly less engagement with this part of the country. So now, which subsectors are doing well with data? So we categorise non-profit organisations using the same categories that NCVO used in the Almanac, which is the ICNPO. So that's the International Classification of Non-Profit Organisations. We have added in a couple of public sector, so the regional, national and local government activities as well. A lot of them are, the descriptions are fairly self-evident, but I did want to highlight social services. That can be a little bit misleading. So the definition of the social services category is family services, services for the elderly, temporary shelters, refugee assistance, income support and maintenance. But what we can see is that some of those government organisations, emergency services, research and grant making foundations are scoring higher in terms of data maturity. Data is an essential part of what they do, particularly emergency services, research and grant making foundations. So it would maybe make sense that they have higher data maturity. It's part of their business. But there's some activities where they're scoring a bit low on data maturity. So for religion, culture and recreation, scout and youth groups. Okay, and then we've also categorised commercial sector organisations. So this is the first year that we've split commercial sector organisations into subcategories. We've used the SIC codes used by UK Companies House. If the company was from the UK, this is matched automatically. But for non-UK organisations, we matched ourselves, which category we felt the organisation fit into. These aren't the best categories for this purpose. So looping in motorcycle repairs with retail trade doesn't really make sense, I don't think, for this situation. Also, most of our organizations come from information and communication, which is super broad, or professional, scientific, and technical activities, which is also very broad. So we are open to suggestions of better categorization systems to use, but it's a nice starting point and it's been interesting to look at. So I'll make a similar point that financial and insurance organizations have data as part of their business and part of what they do. So we're maybe not surprised that they're scoring higher in terms of data maturity. But then we've got manufacturing, construction, kind of other service activities are scoring a little bit lower on average in terms of their data maturity. So every year we get asked the question, are bigger organizations doing better? And every year we have a look and we never find any meaningful difference between the size of an organization and their data maturity score. So what we have here is a comparison between organizations' income and data maturity score. And I will say that there is quite a bit of missing data on a higher level. This is mainly UK charity data because we have really good access to that income data from the Charities Commission, whereas getting commercial organisations' income data can be a little bit more complicated, but it's maybe something we'll work on in the future. But anyhow, you can see that there isn't really a relationship between the income and data maturity score. We've split the data into two buckets. So there's a small number of organisations with a massive income, and it made it difficult to see. So on the right, we have charts. So we have organisations with an income of less than 100 million. And then on the left, we have organisations with an income of over 100 million. And organisations with an income of over 100 million are called super major charities. And they make up about 0.4% of all charities. So it's not a large number of charities. And actually, most charities have an income below 5 million. It's interesting to look at for sure. Okay, so now we have the official benchmarks of 2024 to 25, so the last financial year. We can't claim credit for the wonderful pun that is official. That came from Luke Johnston at National Lottery Community Fund, so thank you. And if anyone else has wordplay on the fish theme, let us know because we will use it because we do enjoy fun. Is here. So we've got 269 organisation assessments, and the average scores are quite similar between the sectors, again, as I said before. So not-for-profit and commercial sectors had an average of 2.8 out of 5, and public sector organisations had an average of 3. And we see a similar trend to what we saw in the 5-year visualisation, where we've got about 5% of organisations in the mastering stage, very few in the unaware stage, and most organisations in the learning and developing stage. And when we look on a theme by theme basis, you can see that it's pretty close. There isn't a great deal of difference between sectors. Again, especially in tools and leadership, they have very similar theme scores. But there are some slight differences. So the public sector scores slightly ahead on uses, data, and culture. And then the commercial sector is slightly ahead in terms of skills. But this is also a similar picture to what we see on the 5 level, kind of zooming out data. So we're seeing similar trends between sectors. And now I will hand back to Sian to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into some interesting bits.
Thanks, Libby. So we're going to dive in for a closer look at some of the interesting and curious findings. We're slightly widening the lens here to the data from the most recent 2 years, partly just to get the number of organisations, particularly in the public sector, up to a big enough data set to explore. So I mentioned earlier we've got like nearly 2 million data points, so it's a mighty treasure trove, and it is a little bit of a tricky challenge deciding what and how to present back to you. So I'm hoping not to overwhelm you with the charts. So I'm just going to, as a little way of an orientation, where we're going to be comparing the sectors side by side. They're going to go in this order. We'll have the commercial on the left, not-for-profit in the middle, and the public sector on the right. And I did say at the beginning that I would return to delve a little bit more into some of those rewards and benefits and how they're being seen. You'll note there are leaders and laggers in every sector. Here we're just taking the average scores for per sector around those uses of data. And you can see in this comparison that the commercial sector is doing stronger overall and is doing better on the influence of data on strategic planning and decision making, its influence on income generation. And you see that again in the not-for-profit sector, which, to be fair, you would expect. The public sector is not in that kind of operating model of needing to generate income in the way that other sectors do. Interestingly, on that efficiency savings at the bottom there that I mentioned earlier, you can see the commercial sector are definitely reaping greater rewards in that realm. And then when we look, so that's the kind of internal focus. Whoops, missed that little thing. When we look at the outward facing services, it's again, you see kind of more similarities here between the commercial and not-for-profit sectors in many ways. But commercials do have the edge, especially in that use of data in the design and delivery of their services and products. And on the bottom row there, looking at outcomes. So this is I would say one of the toughest realms of data use and analysis, and actually even getting the data. But understanding outcomes is a really tricky area. Again, the commercial sector say they seem to have the lead here. So let's have a look at some of the analysis. This is a kind of taking it to a higher level of looking at the sophistication and the types of analysis that are going on. And this is all sectors, just while I kind of talk you through. So we look at 5 types of analysis, and it ranges on the left from quite basic counts, adding things up in basic charts, taking the averages, through to descriptive analysis, which is much more in the realm of taking an overview, looking at the range, looking at trends and what's happened, summarising over time. Diagnostic in the middle there is much more about drilling into the why questions, drilling in to explore causes and patterns and anomalies and discovering differences and correlations. When you move to the right, we've got predictive analysis. So this is very much more future looking. It's about forecasting and modelling trends and behaviour and starting to learn and predict the future things. The starting of the realm of AI in there, and also in prescriptive analysis. So prescriptive analysis is about how you can do things in the best way. It's all about optimization, recommending decisions, experimental design, simulation, a lot of AI in that kind of more advanced type of analysis. And interestingly, when we compare the 3 sectors across those 5 areas, you'll see the public sector is doing very well in this area. It's much stronger in the public sector, some of that more diagnostic, predictive and prescriptive type of analysis compared with both the commercial and the not-for-profit sector. The commercial is doing slightly more in that diagnostic realm. But yeah, so that's quite an interesting view on some areas where the public sector is doing stronger. And then when we look at the kinds of tools that are being used across the sectors, we've selected 5 of the main types of tools. You will be unsurprised to see spreadsheets all over it at the top there. Of course, every sector uses spreadsheets a lot. Just sort of drawing your attention to the bottom of the list, though, when you look at the more specialist and advanced kinds of tools, the data science tools, the coding, the statistical packages, AI tools, GIS, geographical information management systems. Those are not being used very much relatively to the spreadsheets. Certainly more so in the commercial sector, maybe around 30% of organisations in the commercial sector are using it, just a little over 20% in the public sector, and about, I don't know, it's about 7 or 8% there in the not-for-profit sector. So there's that level of sophistication. Another thing to draw your attention to is those business intelligence tools. So this is the world of dashboards and data visualization. Very strong there in the commercial sector as compared to the not-for-profit and public sectors. And just in the middle there, I think this is fascinating. One of my questions is about the extent to which manual and visual counts are being used. You know, literally 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going on quite a lot, even actually more so in the commercial sector than other sectors. And I would refer you to our previous research reports, state of the sector reports, where we look at the use of paper and the use of filing cabinets, which is still going on quite a lot in every sector. So yeah, worth looking at. Some areas where the not-for-profit sector differ to the others, in particular, way higher in the extent to which they're using data to report to regulators and funders and commissioners. And there's a very high level, relatively a very high level of accountability and transparency required from the not-for-profit sector. Oh, sorry, somebody put, yes, this previous chart, the black is extensive and the grey is moderately. Thank you very much. I've missed that off. Well spotted. Yes, so in this is the extent to which organisations use data to report to regulators. Huge. Absolutely huge in the not-for-profit sector. Another area where the not-for-profit sector is using data more so than other sectors is in measuring the difference they make. So there's a lot of emphasis in the non-profit sector about understanding and measuring their social impact or environmental impact. An area that I find absolutely fascinating is the question of attitudes. So this is like we ask staff to describe what they see as the overall leadership attitude towards data in their organisation. You can see on the left there, hardly any are like totally disengaged and not interested at all. That's like 2% out of all of the organisations in the last couple of years. Again, you know, very few are like, don't see the value of it at all. Most know it's important. They say their leaders know it's important, they're curious about it, they occasionally ask questions, but maybe they're not really convinced about the value of it. Whereas as you move to the right, you've got a kind of 35%, just over a third, who are saying their leadership are engaged, they're supportive, they ask the right questions, they're active in harnessing its value. And then on the very right-hand side there, we've got those leaders that have got attitudes, leaders that really understand how to use data to improve what the organisation does. They drive the questions, they're influenced by the findings, and that they plan and they prioritise data as a vital resource. So when we split those kind of groups of attitudes across the three different sectors, you can see that in some ways, in many ways, the commercial and the pattern for the commercial and not-for-profit sector is quite similar. It is quite different in the public sector, where it seems there's much less of that engagement and really sort of driven leadership, and a lot more of that not quite being so convinced is what the staff are saying about their leadership. And we also noticed in another question that we ask around data or in relation to leadership, is that staff in commercial and not-for-profit sectors are more likely to say that data is regarded as a major organisational priority than the public sector organisations. So I'm going to finish the sort of the interesting, curious things with one of my absolute favourite questions in the whole assessment, which is asking staff whether in their organisation they're comfortable using data internally to ask difficult questions and challenge their practices. And you can see there's quite a lot of disparity of opinion in across all the sectors on that. And I always love to throw that one in there. It's one of the questions in culture. So just to summarise some of the strengths, the comparative strengths that we've seen in the three sectors. In the commercial sector, we're seeing much more use of data to influence strategic planning and decision making. We're seeing more use of business intelligence and much more use of data around efficiency savings. In the not-for-profit sector, lots and lots of reporting to funders and regulators, using data a lot more around their reach and engagement and measuring the difference they make. In the public sector, we're seeing more advanced analysis, we're seeing use of specialist tools. I didn't mention it today, but one of the reasons the public sector also scores quite highly is it does do better overall on a whole series of questions around data security, cybersecurity, and data protection. So I am going to just finish off with a couple of short points about some of the things that are common problems across all sectors. I'd like to start by inviting you to consider the enormity of the white space in this chart. Let's consider that to be a kind of unfulfilled potential, let's say, in skills. When we're looking at skills here, we look in kind of three ways. So the top group of charts is about leadership. The question is to what extent staff agree that they have people with data analytics expertise within their leadership. And clearly the commercial sector are much more confident about this, less so in the not-for-profit sector and much less in the public sector. And I think it's an interesting thing in terms of professions and who is involved at the top table, as it were. You know, typically in the past you'd always have a finance person and maybe you'd have an HR person and other kind of roles at the table. The extent to which data and analytics expertise is at the table in the leadership is a moot area. In the middle there, we're talking about more of those specialist skills around those use of perhaps some of those more sophisticated tools, but does the organisation have the more sort of technical skills and capabilities to maximise the use of their data? And then at the bottom there is kind of more of an everybody question, like, are most staff in the organisation data literate? And again, some real challenges there around lack of data literacy. And my final, oh no, it's not my final, it's the final but one point in my complete chart kill here, is about data quality. So there's a series of questions we ask about data quality. My favourite one actually is whether organisations know the quality of their data or even where their data is. Around half of commercial and not-for-profit organisations and a quarter of public sector organisations say they know the quality of their data. This question on the slide here is like, how good is that data? And as you can see, there's quite a lot of space in there. So given that data is the food that feeds all of this AI, there definitely appears to be quite a gulf there and quite a lot of work to be done on data quality. Libby mentioned this, the slowness of speed. I guess it depends what kind of time frame you're looking at a revolution in. What we know is that those organisations we've talked to that are at that mastering stage, they tell us they've been working at this data stuff for like 8 to 10 years. So this isn't the realm of quick wins in any way. And in terms of investment, arguably never enough money for anything, especially in the not-for-profit sector. But those organisations that are at that mastering stage are much more likely to agree that their leaders are investing enough in data-related resources. So that's people, it's skills, it's learning, and it's tools. So there's a lot of work that needs to go on and a lot of effort to go on to reach that mastering stage. My final slide, definitely my final slide of charts, you'll be relieved to know, is just doing that comparison across the three sectors around that question about how staff in those sectors think they're organised, think their leaders are doing in terms of that investment. And there tends to be, you can see there in that commercial chart on the left, there's slightly more agreement that their leaders invest enough. There's a lot of disagreement in the not-for-profit sector, and ever such a lot of disagreement in the public sector. So to wrap up, this is all of our data maturity work and resources and tools are available on our data maturity hub. So do go visit the data maturity hub. Somebody could drop that link into the chat to make that easier. I forgot to do that. And then there's lots of ways to get in touch with us. So email, we've got contact forms, contact us on LinkedIn and on Blue Sky. And it's time for questions. I'm pleased to say we've got 15 minutes left. I would invite you to take a moment to review the current questions in the Q&A, upvote any you would especially like us to respond to. Do add your own questions. I will stop sharing the slides and we will move to some questions.
Okay, so we'll start in the Q&A. I have picked up one or two questions from the chat, but if you have a question, please do pop it in the Q&A and upvote each other's. Okay, this has been, upvoted quite a few times. So what kind of tools are being invested in by mastering stage companies?
Interesting. Well, we have looked at more advanced organisations and less advanced organisations. I can confirm that actually more data mature organisations say they're using spreadsheets more even than the less mature organisations, but they are also using lots of other tools. So in less mature organisations, they're often only really using spreadsheets as the way of analysis. At the advanced stages, they're using a whole range of data science tools. They're using a lot of business intelligence. Often they've got like data warehouses, and they're using platforms to bring together data from lots of different sources. So, they'll be bringing it from finance, from marketing, from their services. And we see a lot more of that kind of data visualization that is going on to bring data together.
Nice. Another one is, could changes in government policies / legislations change data maturity scores?
I think this is really interesting. I think we have to watch and see. I will say, in Scotland, we have, and we've obviously done a lot of work in Scotland, but they've had a whole data maturity program going for 5 years at least. And there's a lot of other stuff happening in Scotland in terms of investing in universities, investing in skills. They've been really quite pioneering, I would say, in their data endeavours. Other areas where we've seen some quite interesting and quite cross-sector initiatives around data are in London. I mean, London's got some big data work going on. London's Office of Technology does lots of stuff in data, and in Greater Manchester, we've seen a lot of data sharing going on. Amazing platforms, particularly in the health sector, and looking at how different organisations from different sectors can both pool their data and pool the tools and analysis that they're using. I think it will be an interesting one to watch. I'm quite curious about those geographic disparities that we see. I'm not sure what kind of investment the government has made into, so I don't think I've seen barely anything in terms of investment coming into the not-for-profit sector. I've seen a lot happening in government, and we admire much of the work that government's doing on their world of AI and data jobs, families. But yes, yet to be seen. I couldn't directly correlate. I'm curious and interested.
I'll also add that one thing we often think about, especially with public sector organisations, is if they're really hot on data security and the policies around data protection, that can kind of push up their score, particularly in terms of the culture theme has quite a few questions around that. So sometimes you see that they've got a high culture score and it's really driven by that data security side. So a question is, if there isn't a correlation between data maturity and income, what is the key sell to the board?
Well, I suppose it's about I suppose it's relative. Like what I would say is we did originally try and track the data on how many data staff organizations have got. And I suppose we come across organizations that have got 500 staff and nobody's got a data job at all. Whereas some very small organizations, maybe they've only got 10 or 12 staff, but if one of them is a data person, proportionally, that's a huge, that's like a 10% of their staff are data. And I suppose you have to consider in the context of your own organization, what kind of skills and capabilities you've got, both in terms of specialisms and more generalists. The sell to the board really is like, why don't you measure your data maturity and see what your specific issues are and then address those. And I think it's different for every organization. So it's hard to kind of give a blanket response on that. But yeah, I suppose lots of organizations are not spending a lot of time. What we see is regardless of data maturity, even on typically about half of staff time is being spent on data. I suppose the sell to the board is, even if your staff are spending half of their time working on data, why are you not reaping those rewards and benefits that we've seen?
Do you have an opinion on whether organizations with better data maturity have experienced some sort of data disaster in the past? I have a sense that this might be a spur on occasions to actually get things done, but it's just a gut feeling.
That's a great question. I think there's quite rightly, there's quite a lot of terror about cybersecurity stuff and about protecting data, and it's a huge responsibility for every organization. And if you work in the kind of sector where you're supporting lots of very disadvantaged and very, very vulnerable people, then the level of responsibility there is huge. And I as a CEO, I would say it's the kind of thing that keeps me awake at night, and you do what you can. We've got like cyber essentials plus, and there are things that you can do to minimize that risk. We haven't focused a lot on that, but in today's session, I know that risk is increasing and it's changing all the time. It's something that leaders have to absolutely take notice of. And actually, I don't think you can really move this is a hunch, but I don't think you can progress into those more advanced stages of data maturity until you've got your house in order and you're secure and you've got your staff trained up and aware and fully understanding the kind of risks and the responsibilities around data.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the common blockers for wider adoption and progress within nonprofits?
In nonprofits, I would say capacity is a massive problem. So many organizations are so stretched, and they spend huge amounts of time kind of reporting data out to other external funders or regulators, and they're so kind of consumed with that, they're actually delivering what they're doing, recording what they're doing, that they often just don't have the capacity or the skills or the resources to be able to fully reap the potential of the data that they've got. I do feel really excited about many of those ones that are pushing past that. You know, it is a matter of prioritizing, it is a matter of investment, and it is a long slog. So I can understand when a lot of organizations are firefighting, particularly now we've got a cost of living crisis. You know, there are a lot of pressures on not-for-profit organizations already. So it's a hard move, and it's also that, you know, it's not instant rewards, so it's only like a few years down the line when you're going to start to really see the fruition after all of that investment. So yes, any funders here, please do support your grantees with lots of funding and support around this kind of capacity building work and that data literacy piece, and investing in leadership's skills and knowledge.
The next question I can answer quite simply. Is the question weighting and benchmarking the same for all types of organisation completing the assessment? Yes, we calculate the organisation scores the same for all organisations. That's that. Do you feel that AI boom has changed something in the mindset in utilising data? So new needs for data management, or maybe some new tools that are used to interact with data?
The big AI thing. I think what we see is that data maturity is a really good basis. Like, it's about being ready for AI, or it helps the preparedness. I think AI is incredibly alluring for lots of people, and it's being hyped up and sold as some kind of magic, magic bullet, silver bullet or whatever, magic wand over organizations' data. I'm not convinced that there is enough understanding about the importance of data quality and the bigger issues around data. I'm excited by the kinds of organizations we see, like, for example, as in Citizens Advice Scotland, where they've been doing some quite pioneering work in AI, and lots of organizations are looking to them for good practice, and quite rightly. And in those organizations, they tell us, it has led to a huge awakening, but a need to up their thinking and their practices around responsibility, around protection, around ethics, and some caution on, like, well, we're learning with this stuff, but it's certainly not saving huge amounts of time right now for most people's jobs, but it has potential, and I think we're very open to seeing the fruits of that.
Mm-hmm. And related to that, we had a question which was, can data maturity and AI readiness arrive in tandem for organisations, or might there be some qualifiers to pass first, so e.g. data accuracy before you can move on to the AI?
I guess AI is a tool that feeds on data, and what I've always quite enjoyed, it's the same kind of thing that people often think the data's fine until they do an analysis of the data, and often when you start to do that analysis, it's the results of it where you go, that's not quite right. And then it kind of feeds this cycle where you go back to the data and you start questioning the quality of the data, or is it being consistently collected, or is it even the right data in the first place? And I do think AI will force more organizations to really dig back into the importance of the quality of the data that they are generating and using in their work.
Mm-hmm. So towards the beginning of the presentation, one of the slides showed corporate organisations in the early years answering with stronger data maturity, and there was a drop off. So that's that line chart we showed. And we said we're not sure why this is, but do we have any theories?
Well, I suppose the first thing I would say is it was a very small data set in that first year. I think we only had about 120 organisations. So I think it was like 30 or 33. Maybe they were enthusiastic adopters who wanted to kind of, maybe they were curious about their data maturity. Maybe they were very data driven organizations who were keen to kind of see how well they were doing. So I suppose as time's gone on and the volume of organizations has increased, maybe we're getting a truer picture over time as that proportion increases. But obviously the commercial sector is huge. I mean, there are like 5 million businesses in the UK, I think. So the fact that we've got, you know, a few hundred is a small microcosm. But of course, users are self-selecting. So that's maybe why.
Okay, so we do still have quite a few questions. We've only got 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask probably one final question, which has the most interaction. When an organization moves up in their maturity level, is it more likely to be led by 1 or 2 teams that are making significant improvement in their data use case that really put data in the spotlight, or an across the board improvement in data literacy driven by an organizational mandate?
Interesting. Weirdly, I don't think I can answer that question, but I am quite curious about this data team versus everybody approach. I'm not sure if there's a clear answer on that. I do see where there are dedicated teams, like some organizations got huge data teams with like, you know, 40, 50 people working on data stuff. And their challenge often is working with other parts of the organization. Often in smaller organizations, data is much more everybody's job. And there's maybe because they're smaller organizations, it's much easier to have that conversation about data. But I'm not really sure of the answer to that question, I'm afraid, which feels a bad way to finish because it is 1 o'clock. But finish we must. So there will be the slides and the recording will be made available. The slides will convert into a short report of some kind, and they'll be available probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I just wanted to finish off actually with a personal thank you to my colleague Libby here, because Libby is gradually leaving Data Orchard and has begun her master's degree in Belgium. But Libby has been with us for many years and has helped develop our amazing visualizations. And I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Libby. It's been a joy to work with you, and thank you for dealing with all of this millions of data points and all of these endless charts. So yes, to Libby Harkins, the artist behind the visualizations. Thanks very much all for coming. Do get in touch. It would be lovely to hear from you. You take care. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.